Good morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene. And today we're talking about being a paid GM or something like that.
No, it's more like, does being paid to GM change the way you run the game?
Okay, much better. I was confused by the topic.
So there is a question out there that kind of in the webosphere,
Ethosphere, the
internetosphere, on the internets. Anyway, so it's the question is a GM a player in the game? Now, this stems from the idea that there was another question that asked if being paid or not paid as a GM changed the way you GM. And this question that this other person asked about is a GM a player? At first I was like, well, right? Of course, a GM is a player in the game.
Well, by that, do you mean that a GM is sometimes a player in the game, or as the GM, he's a player in the game?
As a GM, is he playing in the game?
You just answered my question with a question.
No. I mean, that's the answer. As a GM, if you're a GM, are you playing in the game? Are you a player in the game? And to me, it seemed like, well, of course you're playing in the game. You're part of the game, so you are playing in the game.
But you're not really a player in the game. You're running the game. You're in charge of everything. You're the judge of what people are saying, the referee, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think as simple as I thought this answering that question was, I thought it was getting more difficult as I saw posts, people talking about being a GM and whether they're a player, whether they're outside the game because they're controlling the environment and everything else. Once one person simply said, of course I'm playing in the game. I'm in every scene.
That's a little egotistical.
But he's saying that he is in every scene because not only is he describing the environment that they're in, but he's playing NPCs and he's controlling adversaries of the players.
I would argue that is part of running the game.
Yes.
You present the scene to the people, and then you allow the player characters to go with it, right? Versus you're not just telling them a story like, this is the book I'm writing here, this is what's going to happen, and they're just along for the ride.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I don't think that makes them not playing in the game. But I don't know. It was a weird post that this person put, and it got me thinking. Just it went down that rabbit hole. Well, is a player a player? Is a GM a player? How come we cannot be a player?
This is why the topic was confusing to Jolene,
yes.
Because I thought we were talking about paid GMs, so that's what I looked up.
Well, another thing is this was a post on a forum on Facebook, and of course people read the question and sometimes don't. They think they're asking a different question than they're... Or
they answer the question they really want to answer versus what the actual question is.
There's that too. So it was the answers were very varied, right? And there was this one person that posted that wrote that he didn't like the term playing or play because he said that as a GM, you're doing more than just playing. You're creating, you're figuring things out. You're going to try to entertain the other players, and it's a bigger role and it's a bigger job. And that by saying playing, a lot of people think it's just like it doesn't encapsulate everything that a GM is doing and has to do to have a successful game.
That goes back to like. When somebody at work asks you what you're doing on the weekend and you say, oh, me and my friends are getting together and we're going to play tabletop role-playing game or we're going to play a game.
Right.
And then they're like, oh, how old are you? What kind of game are you playing? What are you doing? Monopoly? I use that voice because that's the way they sound to me. Because they have no clue as to what you're doing, right?
Right.
And they think when you say you have a bad connotation or denotation of playing, That's
Right.
where it comes from. That's
Right.
where the
It's for
idea
kids.
comes from. Yeah.
Right.
Like it's not a real, like, oh, okay, whatever.
It's not an adult thing to do, and it
Because you don't usually say, oh, we're doing role playing, because then some
more
people,
questions come up.
yeah.
Like,
Excuse
what are
me?
you talking about? Yes, I think that is one reason I had kept it not a secret, but I didn't advertise what I did for years and years. Right? I just like, oh, I'm going camping with my brother when I'd go on
To DungeonCon?
to a convention.
Which I thought was the strangest thing to say,
You don't
because
believe that?
DungeonCons is in February. Who wants to go camping in February? Unless you're crazy and want to be cold.
And rainy, because it usually rains.
Or, yeah,
Used to
rainy or
anyway.
snowy or...
Back in the old days, before times. No, it just who knows what's gonna happen. But usually it used to rain that weekend, but now it only rains every once.
So that's where you had the...
The bad connotation about playing.
Yeah.
I think so. You're right. But at some point, I don't know when it was exactly. I just didn't care about people knowing that what I did.
It was with age. Once you hit a certain age, you didn't care anymore.
And now I proudly promote everything I do. I tell them where they go. Oh, and the people already know at work. I mean, I work with these people for, at the particular place I'm at, 12 years. So, like, they know, oh, yeah, Saul plays those games.
And they've actually heard about it, right?
Right. Now,
Some of them.
some of them.
Some of them. No.
Yeah, some of them in caves, I think. Right? Because they don't know about, like, Critical Role and stuff. They're like, Dungeons and Dragons? What's that? You have no clue what that is. I mean, I find it difficult
Anyway,
to perceive that there's no knowledge of that. So as I went down a rabbit hole as a GM player, I thought about defining terms and coming up with stuff, but I didn't want to like make this discussion even more complicated than it had to be.
which is good, because when you said paid GMs, that's what I looked up. And there's some interesting ideas out there. So the actual question was if you're a paid GM, how would it change your playing style, or would it change the way you run a game?
Right. Would it change the way you run the game? Right.
Well, I came across this article from 2006, or some kind of Reddit post or something
Wow. That's a
from 2006
while
about
ago.
these guys, that the idea that they wanted to pay a GM to run a game for them once a week for 6 to 8 hours, and they wanted to know how much they should pay him. And then they define what running the game is, right? They wanted miniatures when needed, maps, secret letters to each other,
Handouts, right?
totally fleshed out NPCs. So everything that
A world created.
Well, no, they wanted to run. They
They wanted to pick the world.
Yeah,
they ran it.
like they were talking about 3.5 at the time.
Right.
And I was thinking, well, that's what a GM does anyway. But I think they wanted it more on a professional level, right? Like he's going to devote. And the guy even said, well, maybe he can't have a full-time job if he's doing this, so we need to pay him. How much do you pay somebody who is going to be doing this as their job? And I'm like going, well, and then the answers varied from I would make you pay me $50 an hour if you wanted that, to I would do it for minimum wage and gas money, to
I'd take a guess.
$10 Canadian, because that's all I know, and I don't know what that means. I'm just saying that. I don't know.
It's like $7 an hour.
And 2006, that was a while ago. Not a huge long time ago.
14
but a while
years
ago,
or
yeah.
so. Yeah.
So that was when the question was back then, right? And now I know that there are actual paid GMs.
Right.
And how do they do it differently than say Saul, who preps a game for a convention, right? And he puts a lot of time and energy. I would say probably a good 40 hours into getting it ready. Of
Yeah,
course,
probably.
he spreads it out.
Yeah, I do spread it out, and it's not like committed hours. If I was more organized, it probably cut that into like at least
Half the time.
20 hours probably. But I do so much haphazardly, or with not a lot of time commitment. Like, I'm going to devote these next 2 hours to doing what I gotta do. I do a little bit here, a little bit there. Oh, I got an idea, a little bit here. So it is about 40 hours of just sometimes-
and that's for like a 4 to 6 hour game or a 6 to 8 hour game, right?
I usually plan for a 6 hour game, but I can never get my timing right. And I'm like, sometimes the players run right through the game, and sometimes they get stalled, and I'm like, man.
So if you were being paid for that, then that would be an issue. You would have to make sure you had extra material
Right.
to be able to extend it if they were running through your stuff really fast, right?
Well, yeah, but that guy's talking about a campaign, right? So the campaign is something that's long term, and
6 to 8 hours a week for a campaign. Oh my God,
that's what we used to do.
I know, but that's a long. I mean,
Yeah, if it's D&D, throwing a couple battles, it's done.
Well, yeah. Well, and I find it interesting. And then the other people, more recent articles on Reddit and the inner tubes, as Saul would say, they were talking about, if I'm going to be paying somebody $20 to run for a game session, it better be very good. It better entertain me the whole time. And I'm like, wow, that's the way you're going into it. I wouldn't want you to pay me for that, right? That's a lot of pressure to be able to.
Right, to be able to deal with that kind of expectation.
Yeah.
And the weird thing is there's a couple of things. One of my friend Mike, when I was on vacation, I visited Portland and Washougal, Washington, where my brother lives. And Mike was really interested in this whole paid GMing thing. Like, he goes, why do people do it? Who would pay for it? How much would they pay? And I'm like, I don't know the answers to those questions.
Well, I can see it as if it was a game store offering a game and they want to incentivize a person to run the game for people, maybe charge like $5 a person for a 4 to 6 hour game or whatever. But then, and the difference would be, right, they would really prep the game, right? If they're running Pathfinder or whatever, you would want to have a mat out. You'd want to have maybe, I don't know what would you do? You would make sure everything was planned out, but then it might be a little railroady. I don't know.
Well, okay, so you're right. When I was running at Gen Con, I've never been to Gen Con, sorry. When I was running at Legends and I was GMing there, they wanted me to charge $5 per person.
Right.
And then they would give me that credit for the store so I can buy stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you don't have to charge my players so I can spend money at the game store because they're going to buy me stuff usually. And they did. They would buy me I got all the Pathfinder monster manuals up until we stopped playing Pathfinder. And they go, well, it's part of the policy, right? Or whatever. I go,
and I think that the owner of the store, Mel, said that it was more like you're trying to get the people who are coming into the store, they're paying to play in the game. And it was more of an incentive to make the player take it seriously.
Yes. That was the deal.
Which I thought was an interesting thing. And I think once he realized that the people playing in Saul's game were his kids and his friends' kids and his friend, and we all would buy stuff in the store anyway.
Yes.
They
start charging.
He didn't care. But the idea was that if you're running a game for these kids, if they're paying the $5 per game, that they are actually going to take it seriously and show up and play, right?
Right. And that's what I called it. I called it Pathfinder for Kids, and because that's what it was billed as.
Right.
And because my son was a kid at the time, he was 10, 12.
And 9, 10.
Yeah, and his friend was 9 and 10.
Yeah.
And they had an older brother, and then they had Steve, their father. And then we added Jolene.
And then Kevin, our friend Kevin, his son came for a while.
Right. And then also Blaine used to go and play with us. So I would have a group between, I don't know, average 4 to 7 or 8 even. And we played for 4 hours usually. We'd get there around 11 and end around 3, maybe a little bit sooner. And that was fun. I mean, I really enjoyed that time. And I didn't really realize how I don't want to use this word precious, but it was pretty cool because it was kind of like when I was playing as a kid, we'd play every other Saturday. And in this case, we played every other Sunday because we always wanted another Sunday to be free. But it was like clockwork. We always showed up, and it was kind of not an incentive. I guess it was an incentive for me to make sure that I went because it was on this schedule at this game store, and it made us like it was like an event, right? Like getting ready to go to Legends to go play a game and stuff like that. So
and the boys developed their Slurpee habits there then
all
because
kinds of stuff.
they had to have certain, then they got certain things
Snacks.
to get ready to go and got everything ready.
Right.
And they still do it.
They
so.
still do it. So my friend was asking about why do people pay, how much I would charge, how much I would pay. And the only time, and he really had and I think I had that same hurdle. I go, why would people pay to play, right? Because most of the time you're just playing with your friends. And the only thing I could come up with is like this gentleman who in 2006, he's an IT professional. Obviously, he makes a lot of money. And instead of buying a yacht or whatever, people who make a lot of money buy maybe a sailboat because the yachts are really expensive. They really like playing D&D and they want to play as a group. And that's different than one of you GMing because
I think I think when he said that, I hadn't thought about it before, but obviously he was saying that they're professionals, so they don't have enough time to get the game together.
I didn't think about that.
Or they just want to do it as an entertainment thing where someone else is doing
right.
all the prep
That's how
work
I took it.
Yeah,
but you're right. If they're thinking that the person's going to spend a part-time job worth of time, they can't do that.
Right.
That's not the experience they want. One of their friends tossing the game together.
yeah.
So I could see them paying.
Maybe they tried and
yeah, maybe
and whoever was GMing couldn't do it because he had too much stuff to do or whatever.
I think another thing is that they wanted to all play together. That's the only thing I can think of. Like if my friend Mike and Felipe, my brother, and whoever was playing in our games, we all go, well, let's play a game together. And that's kind of the experience we get at a con.
Well, we've done that like with the Pathfinder Society.
Yes.
Or Adventures League. We did that at Pacificon. Well, there were like 6 of us, and we talked about it before, but we kind of, I don't know, we startled the GM because they were a bunch of crazy people.
Well, I've always wanted to do that, right? And then at Pacificon, I thought because it's kind of a lower attendance con, I think it was easier, but they have games on demand, right? Basically, they have beginners games or whatever, where they have pre-made or pre-generated.
And I don't think they don't pay those people. Those people are volunteers that run those games, but they're already everything is already there, so they just have to read it.
They might get credit within the system for running games, or they just like running games.
But I'm saying they're not like, it's not like they bring their own figures and all that kind of stuff.
They might. Some of them might.
The guy that we played didn't.
Well, I think it was brand new, or pretty close to. So I think that was a pretty cool experience of us all just going and playing, and I really like that.
Well, I could see that if there was like somewhere, a game store where everybody wanted to play a game and nobody wanted to run it, and it was available, and they say, "Oh, we charge $20 a person," and okay, we're whatever. Here you go. And then, but I don't know that any of us would have a lot of expectations about what the game would be, because we've played in so many different games with different GMs that you never know what's going to happen, right? You're not going to expect for this amount of money. I expect this game to give me this much enjoyment.
That's funny because just last night I was chatting online with my friend Shannon, and I don't know why it came up, but he asked. Oh, it was for a topic for one of us to talk about. And he said, why do players blame the GM if they have a bad game? And I think his idea was, well, it's not all on the GM's shoulders.
It shouldn't be.
And a lot of people think it is, right? If they have a bad game, they blame the GM instead of blaming their fellow players. And I go, well, I think he was in a bad mood because he kept saying stuff.
So
anyway, but maybe he wasn't in a bad mood, but he was just like, he goes, well, kept like counter, like I would say something and he would counter, but the main gist was, and I kind of agree, right? Players have a big role in in how the game plays out. We were talking when we were talking to Sean Nittner. He said you could have a master class GM and still have a bad game
Yeah.
because the players either they don't gel well together or whatever, and a lot of it is on the a lot of the onus or a lot of the work or a lot of the fun is based on how well the players play together and how they move the game forward. Now, some games are very player, what do you call it?
Driven.
Driven, right? A lot of rules like games are out there, almost GM-less games out there, or rules RPGs that where the players have a lot of agency, and the GM is almost more of a facilitator than the old classic GM making rules. Well, there's still rules, not making rules, but making decisions and stuff like that, and presenting things. The players come up with their own, like, what they are going to do or what they're going to come up against and stuff like that.
So Shannon was saying that players shouldn't blame the GM.
Right.
I agree with that. I agree with that because it's like when Augustine was going to school when he was little, I always used to tell him, you're in charge of how your day is going to go, no matter what the other people are doing, right? You choose to have a good time. And I think that, and I found that in all games that I've played, right? Like if I'm in a bad mood going into the game or I've had a bad day or I have a headache, it's never as fun as if I like just buy into whatever's happening. Yes, I'm in a tavern. Yes, I meet these people and go, right?
Right.
Versus, or, oh yeah, there's a giant purple monster over there that I don't want to see because I'm going to go crazy. Or, that kind of thing, right? It's up to you to bring your best to the table, right? Versus
Right.
you can't just expect the GM to do it.
Right.
And there's GMs that you like, GMs that you don't like, GMs that run a game a certain way. Every GM that you play with is going to be different, right? There's the GM that says, okay, what are you guys doing? And everybody kind of has to come up with it on their own, which is sometimes hard at the beginning. Or there's the person that gives you the scenario. This is what's happening, and now tell me
Right,
what you're
literally
going to do.
throws it in your lap.
Yeah.
Right. This is you guys go to the tavern. There's a billboard. Adventures needed. Bada bing, bada boom. You're on an adventure. Where other GMs would say, "All right, who are you? What are you doing?"
Introduce yourselves, right? How do you know each other?
Yeah,
And there's that moment of,
I thought you were supposed to tell us that. That's happened before. I played and running games like that and ran games like that. And I think Shannon's right. The players have a huge role in it. Other times, I think that where that idea comes from is like old style D&D, like dungeon crawls. Right, you're gonna go dungeon. The GM's in charge of the dungeon, and that kind of translates to like this everything else, the area of the kind of adventure, which
when you say that, I'm like, there's a caller, and everybody's going to tell them what they're going to do.
it kind of
The old style, right?
But how many people actually played that way? Not now.
Well,
in the last 20
now
years.
no.
But
Well.
still, that idea persists that the GM is in charge of how good the game.
Well,
is.
because ultimately not how good the game is, but the GM is in charge of the deciding what the rule is, right? If somebody goes, well, I want my character to do this, and and then they go, well, and that was another thing. Not to change the subject, but that was another thing that people were talking about. If you're paying a GM, how is the GM gonna do the rules? Is a GM going to be more likely to just go with whatever the players want? Or is he going to say, oh no, that's not the way that it works?
Right. Well, I think that's something that's probably covered within the session 0 or the parameters of the game. Like those guys that had put the original poster of that 2006 post about how much should they pay a paid GM. They wanted their own world. They wanted a system that wasn't too like simple, but not really crunchy. And I think he said too crunchy was like Hero or
Yes,
right.
He did,
and 3.5 was like what he was talking about.
Yeah.
That level of crunchiness. So in that sense, they kind of are putting the parameters on there, and the GM can work within those parameters. And I think when you are presenting a certain rule set, that's probably the kind of rules that you want to run. But of course, everybody runs games differently. I was gonna say it's kind of a segue, but the whole idea of players being just as responsible as the GM. I remember years ago we played in a game. I played at a con game, and it was okay. The idea was okay, right? It wasn't fantastic, and the person running was really like hands off. So I like not halfway through the game, but at one point I'm like, what are we doing? What are we supposed to do? Right? And Jonah was in that game. And me and Jonah, we just started like, okay, we're just going to do stuff, crazy stuff, right? So, because we were imprisoned, right? We're on a prison island. And so we're playing and we're just trying to do stuff, we're trying to escape. We're trying to motivate other people to escape. And it was fun because me and Jonah made it fun, right? And not because the GM was doing stuff to make it fun. He was just presenting something, the situation, and we were just it was like a sandbox, right? We just did what we wanted, or did what we wanted to try to do, and then the GM would respond to things, and he just kept responding because we kept throwing more stuff at him.
Right.
And that made it a fun game. And then there's some games where the GM, there's only been one that in my whole career, and my whole time playing at conventions, the game was just, there was nothing there. And it was like, even though the players wanted to do stuff and interact with each other and do things, it was very hard because the GM was just not prepared. And so when we would want to do stuff and he hadn't prepared very much, he kept shooting us down. So it was like, okay, we can't do that. Okay, we can't do that. So in that sense, the GM was totally responsible for the level of play at the table. And then in another sense, the players were able to, in another game, the players were able to just do stuff because the GM wasn't just giving us a lot of stuff to do.
Well, that's the difference between GMing styles, right?
That is.
Some GMs have things set ideas about what's going to happen versus sandbox games where the player does whatever they want. And there's the GM in between who has idea about what's going to happen, but then if the players come up with a different idea, okay, we'll go that way.
Right.
And they're flexible and that kind of thing.
Right. So the original question was, does that change if you get paid or not paid? Does it change the way you run the game?
I don't know. Maybe they prepare more for it.
I think the closest I can think of is me running games at a home and with my friends, I guess.
Versus a convention.
Versus a convention. Now, does that mean I shortchange? Because I'm going to say I work a lot for the game for the con games, simply because I feel a little bit extra responsibility to try to present the best game that I can do because I'm at a convention.
What about when you run a game for like the Stanford group? Do you do more prep for it? I'm asking because the last game that you ran was a Conan game,
right?
And we've all played. I think everybody but Cowie had played in Conan games before.
Yeah, maybe Morgan had played.
I think so.
Okay,
I don't know.
Yeah.
But see, when you're talking about Morgan and Bay and Shannon, they play a lot of games. So whatever game it is, they're going to bring their best to it, right?
Right.
Same with Cowie.
So anyway, about Conan.
But were you like, do you prepare for that kind of game like you do for a convention game? Because or because it's a little bit more casual because you know all the people and you kind of know what the players like and what they're going to do. Because I know for home games, you can present any scenario and they're going to have fun, right?
Right, you're talking about like
Steve and Kathy
kids.
and the kids, yeah. They're going to have fun. Whatever you give to them, they'll take the game in any way you want or any way they want, and you'll just try to corral them back into, okay, so
they're
that's
easy
all.
To please.
Yes.
And they like just a good old time type rock and roll.
Whatever it is.
Yes.
Whatever the mission is, they're down with it.
Okay, so the Conan game, I wanted to run a game that was very Conan-ish.
Yes.
Because we had just read.
We're in the middle of reading Robert E. Howard. Well, in the middle. We're not in the middle because there's a lot of crap out there.
Well, a lot of original stories of Conan.
And I didn't mean that in a bad way. There's a lot of stories, right?
Right, he was a prolific writer. So we a while ago we were doing we were reading as a group
We still are. We just haven't done it. A book club.
a book club about Robert D. Howard's Conan stories, and we're reading them in time chronological order, not in the publication order.
Conan's age versus the way that they were.
Because Robert E. Howard would jump around
Yes.
and wrote stories, and so we wanted to read them in chronological order from like the first tales of Conan when he was young, and then progressed until he's much older. With that in my mind, and the fact that I had never read Conan before, now that I had this idea of how he was portrayed by Robert E. Howard, I have an idea of how the world is, which is pretty different than what I perceived, even just knowing about Conan from the movies, I guess. So for me, Conan, Robert E. Howard's Conan is very visceral, right? You know, it can be gory, but at the same time, it's like there's all kinds of things about the stories that are like, it's about the world, right? It's about, and then there's these tropes in them that really come out.
Yes. And 9 times out of 10, if there's a monster, it's going to be shaped like an ape. I'm just telling you right now.
Yeah, Robert E. Howard has this thing about apes, right?
Yeah.
Fantastical apes, like King of the Apes.
Yes.
Deal.
Yeah.
So it was pretty neat. There's no ape in my my story, but the stories were very interesting in the sense that just anything could happen,
right?
And I was just like, there was a couple stories where Conan pairs up with a guy, or a fellow adventurer,
yeah.
And and he talks up this person as being the master thief, and you really kind of get attached to him, and whap, he kills the guy, or kills the fellow adventurer, and sometimes he meets up like on an adventure in the middle of the adventure, or sometimes at the beginning, whatever. So it was a very deadly world. It was very over the top too. At the same time, Robert E. Howard wrote in the 20s.
This helped you to prepare the Conan game,
and I wanted to present that type of game when I ran the game. And I don't know if I did or not. Did a good job with that or not. Another thing I did was I used a adventure from a book, a published adventure. And I always have problems with published adventures because I want to read them. I want to make sure I get everything right. And then, like, even then, I'm like, what? Did I get everything right? So I must have read that adventure like 4 or 5 times.
But the players aren't always going to do what the published adventure thinks they're going to do.
Right. And that's another thing. Pretty much, you guys didn't go off the rails too much or go out of what the parameters of what was going on in the book, in the published adventure. So it worked out pretty well.
So was it, back to my question, so you didn't prepare for it as much as you do like a convention game. So if your friends are paying you to play a game, but your friends wouldn't pay you to play a game, right? So if somebody's paying you to play a game,
I probably
are you going to prepare?
Yeah, I'll probably devote more time. I think another thing is they kind of snuck up on me.
Everything sneaks up on you, babe.
Yes. So I think I perceive the idea that I'm presenting a game when I'm being paid sort of by the convention to put on a game. Because usually if you run a game at a local convention here in the Bay Area, they will waive the fee for the convention.
If you have a certain amount of people at your table for a certain amount of hours.
Right. Yeah.
Because they in a way, they are paying you because that's like $60, right? Or $80 or whatever
it is.
But they also want you to run the game for 6 to 8 hours with a certain number of people. So they're calculating into it the amount of their ticket, right?
Right.
So you are kind of getting paid for it,
right,
in a way. So you do really prep for it, right?
Probably below minimum wage, but yes.
It doesn't matter. I mean,
right. It doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter at all. So I think it's pretty neat. That kind of sits on my shoulders, the idea that I'm being paid. But does that mean I'm shortchanged my player home game? Because at times, in fact, I was just in a game where this GM was play testing for a game that he's going to run at Gen Con.
Yeah.
And another Gen Con games run 4 hours. They have 4-hour slots.
You do play test games.
Yeah.
You play tested Blade Runner with me and Felipe and Mike.
Right.
And I think by doing that play test, it probably made your game at the convention a lot better.
Well, I changed it. I didn't like the adventure.
You like seeing the way that it ran with us.
Right.
And changed the way that you did it, right?
Right. I felt that I had to change it. There was only 3 players, but I thought it was it just didn't have enough I'm not player. It didn't have enough Blade Runner-esque
Yeah. Which Blade Runner choices are not what you want to do. I'm just saying, they're gut wrenching choices.
And that's what I wanted. And the adventure in the book that's called Electric Sheep, it just didn't have it for me. And now I've heard people have run that adventure. The people posted on Facebook and other venues or social media, and they have a great time, right? And there's no doubt about it. But I needed an adventure that was within 6 hours. Mm-hmm. That adventure runs a little bit longer because it's a long adventure, and it was part of a Kickstarter, so they want to give you a good meaty adventure. So I had to shorten it, and the idea of shortening it, I was like, I didn't like the way it was going to work.
Right.
So I'm just going to rewrite the adventure. I'm going to use the props. I'm going to use some of the props. I'm going to use some of the stuff. And it worked out really good. It has worked out really good. I've run it twice.
A lot of people do play test their games they're going to run at conventions.
Right. So that's what happened. I was playing in the game, and this person wanted to run in a 4-hour slot. It took us 8 hours of playing online to run the game or to
play the game.
And not even finish it because
right.
we kind of had to rush the epilogue hit, and then have the players say what happened. So I think for most people, if they're getting paid to run a game, it's going to change the way they run the game.
The amount of time and prep they put into it, right?
Because they wanted me special, and I've done that before at conventions where.
Every game you run at conventions, you go all out. Pictures of the characters, pre-made characters, or for Tales of the Loop, character sheets for people to make their characters and giving them pictures of a bunch of choices, right?
Right. Yeah, I think the most work I did was probably Tecumseh.
Oh, well, because that's a very, very complicated game to do.
Well, it's complicated. The world is complicated. Not the rules weren't complicated.
I burned my hand for that game.
So there was So it was very interesting. I think the props that I made for that game really kind of like it just got them concentrated on what was going on.
Well, in that game, the props were very important to it because it was the kind of world it was. Very, very. What do you want to call it? What is that word?
Byzantium?
Yeah.
There was a lot of bureaucracy.
Very palatial, like palace bureaucracy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Different kinds of
and a lot of things
secrets.
about honor and your place in society.
It was a medieval game set on a different world, right?
Right. And it was it's a very interesting world. Anyway, so I've done that kind of stuff, and then those Tales of the Loop, all I did was of course character sheets, but then I printed out a bunch of actors from the 80s, child actors or kids actors. You got Winona Ryder, you got Tom Bridges, and all these people from the 80s. So some of you may not have a clue as to who I'm talking about.
Which some of his players had no idea who they were, except their dads did, and were laughing.
Yeah, that was a really interesting dichotomy between people who are really young and people who are a little bit older. Yeah, their parents.
So I guess it does change.
For me, it does.
The preparation that you do for the game. Now, according to all the people that I read on the inner tubes, some people like that, some people don't like it. There's a lot of I don't like the idea that if you're paying somebody to run a game, your expectation is that they have to entertain you. Right. I find that I would go with you should also bring your best to the game, right?
Right. And I think that's what Shannon was saying is that players have probably a bigger role whether they're going to have a good time or not.
Well, yeah, I totally agree.
Okay, yeah, we're in agreement there. So if you run a game, I think most likely if you are getting paid, it changes the way you're going to run the game. For me, that's the way I feel because there's this added thing about responsibility for.
Right.
And if I was getting paid like $20 an hour, I can't imagine. I'd be a nervous wreck because I would like really take responsibility for running a good game, or at least presenting the best game that I could, especially if people were paying me a decent amount of money to put that on. But I know I've gone. We did research about being a paid GM a while ago, and there was these there was this cafe in New York, and my friend Mike, well, he said, well, it's in Manhattan, which I guess
That's the more posh part, right?
right. So people make a lot of money if they have to live in Manhattan or in Manhattan or in that area.
It's not like other people don't come from other boroughs into Manhattan.
Yeah, but they don't live in Manhattan, right? Usually. Oh, it's very expensive to live there. And this cafe is in Manhattan, and they charge like $300 a night for like a 4-hour session or a 5-hour session.
Wow.
At the cafe, right? And that's their like starting. And you get a private room, of course, right? But I thought it was like $400 a game. I'm like, I don't think it was per person though, but maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, I thought it was like, wow. And then like that guy, he goes, one person said, I charge $50 an hour per person. I go, wow, you can make good money for a weekend. Anyway, I think it does change because it does, for me in my brain, it changes what expectations are. So that's it. I think there's a lot of things that go into what changes the way you run a game when you are a GM, and definitely being paid kind of changes the expectations.
There you go. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul,
and Jolene.
and you have a good day.